Many people who live with schizophrenia also experience negative auditory voices, which is a part of their hallucinations. And so in today's video, we're going to be looking at what exactly these negative voices are, and also looking at some of the reasons why they might happen. Welcome back to the Living Well with Schizophrenia YouTube channel. My name is Lauren and I make videos about what it's like living with schizoaffective disorder or schizophrenia. If you would like to see more videos like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel so as not to miss any new content. And also, if you would like to help us support the creation of future videos like this one, please make sure to check out the link to our Patreon page. It's in the description below. Any support is really appreciated. Thank you. All right, so first off, what exactly do we mean by negative voices? So negative voices are really any auditory hallucination that is frightening to a person, distressing, threatening, includes commands of dangerous natures or of distressing natures, or criticism of a person. So I personally don't experience negative voices constantly, but when I'm becoming more ill or when, things are going downhill, I do experience a lot more of the negative voices and negative talk. And this takes the form typically in the form of dangerous command hallucinations or threatening command hallucinations or criticisms such as, saying that I'm not good enough or that I am stupid or incapable in some way or those kinds of criticisms of me. So some of the potential consequences of dealing with these negative voices include, obviously lower self-esteem if somebody is criticizing you in your head all the time and, saying distressing things. It plays a toll on your mental health in that alone. It's also debilitating in terms of social engagement and social interactions, because if someone is in your head constantly saying things that are distressing to you, it's very hard to engage normally with other people, which leads to social isolation. It also leads to a greater need for increased care. And also one of the major things that it can lead to is suicide. So we are talking about the negative experience of voices in this video, but it's also important to note that not everybody experiences voices in this way. This is really common, especially in North America, to experience negative voices with schizophrenia, but it is not the way everyone experiences voices. And so we are going to be discussing findings from an article that was published in the Clinical Psychology Review, which kind of goes over several different studies that kind of speculate on why there's this difference between people who experience negative voices and people who don't, and kind of speculating as to potential causes for this. We'll link to this article in the description below. All right, so in this article, they discuss two major points that seem to be emerging as to why people experience these negative hallucinations. And so these include experience of adverse life experiences. And so this can include anything from sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, as well as physical and emotional neglect. Another point that is emerging is the concept of cultural significance in a person's life. All right, so just diving into the first one, being adverse life experiences a little more, they discuss three different studies actually, that find a little bit of different results. The first one found a correlation between adverse life effects or adverse life experiences and negative voices. Now, this doesn't necessarily indicate causation, which means that adverse life experiences lead to negative voices, but they did find correlation. So the two were connected in some way. The second study did not find correlation, but the third study found something interesting. And so what this third study found was that adverse life experiences became a proponent for hypervigilance, which was a mediating factor in terms of experiencing negative voices. So what I mean by hypervigilance is that if someone experienced a negative life experience in their lifetime, it led to them being in a bit of an increased and elevated state that was kind of fearful of bad things happening again. And this is what they mean by hypervigilance. And so this hypervigilance is what they found led to the experience of negative voices. Now, again, this is all just speculation, and it's really more of a correlational effect that was found in these studies, as opposed to, again, a causational effect. So they don't know that this is what happens where, adverse life experiences lead to negative voices, or this hypervigilance concept leads to negative voices, but they are speculating that it could be a potential cause. And the second major point that they were discussing in this article was the concept of culture and cultural significance in a person's life. And so they mentioned 2 studies in particular. The first study was a bit of an era-based study. This study examined patients with schizophrenia from the same hospital, but from 2 different time periods. The first one being from 1933 to 1939, and the second period being from 1986 to 1987. And what they found in terms of these 2 cohort groups were that they all experienced or mostly experienced auditory hallucinations, but the sources and the content of them were different. And so the group from the 1930s experienced primarily religious and more benign auditory hallucinations, and people from the 1980s, they also experienced religious hallucinations, but they also experienced more secular hallucinations as well as technology-based hallucinations in terms of the negative voices that they were experiencing. So some examples of these included the 1930s cohort experiencing, auditory hallucinations such as be a better person, live right, be good and go to heaven, lean on the Lord. So kind of these more benign but religious toned hallucinations. And the group from the 1980s experienced hallucinations such as kill oneself or others, do perverse things, set fire to the lawn. So clearly far more negative and distressing in a way. And so there was also reported differences in terms of affective content of the auditory verbal hallucinations. And so, the 30s group was, we want to go to heaven, versus the 80s group being more like, you will be crucified for your sins. And so the cultural milieu of the time really plays a role in terms of shaping the content of these negative auditory hallucinations. All right. And the second study that was looked at in terms of cultural significance was a cross-cultural study. So there was a group that they examined in the United States and also a group that they examined both in India and Africa. They realized through their study that there was a big difference in terms of the American group having more negative experiences of hallucinations, and the group in India and Africa having more benign and relational experiences with their auditory hallucinations. And so there was some speculation as to why this may have been, and primarily it included the concept that in America, there is more of a undertone of the self and the mind essentially being a private matter and being an individual matter. And so the Indian group and the African group saw the mind and whatnot as more of a relational component and had a more porous relationship with the mind and thought. And so, if those 2 assumptions are correct, it's kind of easy to see how the Americans might see voices as more of an intrusion and a distressing thing, as opposed to how the Indian and African cohorts saw it as more of a, benign relational thing that was connected to the other people around them. And so the American cohort saw their negative hallucinations as an external presence that wasn't necessarily a person, and that was just kind of this menacing figure in their mind. Whereas the African and Indian cohort saw it more as people in their life. They experienced the hallucinations as other people in their life, and they had more of a relationship with their voice that wasn't necessarily negative and that was more constructive in nature. And so there's a huge cultural difference here in terms of how Americans interpret their voices and how cultures such as Indian cultures and African cultures experience their voices. All right, so those 2 main things, adverse life experiences and cultural components, were the 2 main things discussed in this article that could be reasons why someone would experience negative voices. I also want to talk a bit more about some of my own speculations about why negative voices exist or happen. So for me personally, I know that when I am under a lot of stress, I think the voices get more negative. And so I don't know if there's a correlation necessarily between people who experience negative voices and the amount of stress that they're under. People in North America are under a lot of stress in terms of just the capitalistic, individualistic society that we live in. It creates a lot of stress in a person. So maybe that is feeding into the negative hallucinations a little bit. I don't know. I think that stigma and shame and self-acceptance also play a large role in terms of the occurrence of negative auditory hallucinations. The go-to treatment modality in North America is to medicate when someone is experiencing distressing voices and to try to eradicate those voices as much as possible. And so this kind of sends the message to patients in North America that they are faulty in some way because they are experiencing voices and that they need to work towards medicating away these voices. So when they can't medicate away all of these voices, it kind of makes sense that the voices might turn negative and they might find or interpret these voices as distressing or menacing because they shouldn't be there. And so, there might be a bit of a shift necessary toward understanding that it might be okay to live with some voices and you may not need as much medication, or, medication might not be the be all end all in terms of how to deal with and manage your hallucinations. I think there is still a lot of stigma within our culture and society too around mental illness, and especially mental illnesses such as schizophrenia. And so I think that there is a lot of internalized shame for people who are living with an illness like schizophrenia, which could result in some of that hypervigilance that I was talking about earlier, or could result in just, negative self-worth, which could easily lead to negative voices being heard by the individual. I know that for me personally, I've been on a very long journey of self-acceptance, and I'm for sure not at a point of complete self-acceptance, but I do accept myself and my illness a lot more than when I first started out on this journey. And, I've noticed a difference in terms of the negativity of my hallucinations. When I first started out and first was experiencing these symptoms, it was a lot more negative more frequently. And with a lot of work on self-acceptance and whatnot, the frequency of the negativity in terms of the voices has gone down a bit. And so I think that self-acceptance plays a large role in terms of the negativity of the voices as well. And also, I think just an extension of the cross-cultural study that I talked about earlier, I think that, collectivism versus individualism plays a big role in terms of the cultural identity of a person and how they experience their symptoms like hallucinations. So if someone is in an individualistic society, such as in North America, I think it's more likely that they, the concept that I discussed earlier of being a single person fighting off this illness and thus interpreting it as menacing or distressing and an intrusion on their mind, I think is probably the way things go in an individualistic society, contrary to a more collectivist society, which, welcomes differences a little bit more and celebrates differences and whatnot, and leans on that relational component as well. I think that it creates a lot more room for someone's experience of hallucinations to be more positive in nature. And another kind of idea that we were kind of tossing around when brainstorming this video was the concept of introvertedness versus extrovertedness, and whether or not that plays a role maybe in someone's experience of hallucinations. I personally am more of an introvert, and so maybe I experience the hallucinations more as an unwanted interference and an unwanted presence, which would maybe lead to more negative experience of the voices. Whereas if someone was more extroverted, they may welcome the experience of communicating with their voices a little bit more, and they may appreciate that extra company, which may lead to more positive experiences of hallucinations. I have a friend who is very, very extroverted, and she loves communicating with her hallucinations most of the time. And it's a very comforting presence for her in her life, and a positive one. And so I don't know if this is a correlational component, but it's something to think about. All right, so in conclusion, I just want to share that for me personally, when I'm experiencing really negative content of auditory hallucinations, it's generally a sign that I need to seek additional help and support. And it's a sign that things are kind of getting worse for me. Now, that said, obviously this is not something that I experience on a constant basis. And so my heart really goes out to people who do experience this on a more frequent basis and experience these negative voices as a constant presence in their life. I can't imagine what that must be like, because I know personally that it's very distressing when the negativity comes my way in terms of the voices that I experience, and it's really hard to manage and to get through. So I understand, and I really sympathize with you if you experience it on a more frequent basis. If this is a really distressing and difficult to manage part of your symptoms, being the negative voices that you hear, please don't be afraid to reach out for additional support or help with that. This may mean changing up your medication or altering doses or whatnot, or it may be more therapeutic interventions, such as CBT or that kind of thing, through therapy with someone to address your relationship with the negative voices a little bit more, and maybe addressing some of that hypervigilance if that's playing a role in your experience of negative voices, or working on, some of the things that may be contributing to the voices being negative. All right, so thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful or insightful in some way. If you liked it, please make sure to give us a thumbs up, and also make sure to subscribe so as not to miss any future content. Also, again, if you would like to help support the creation of future videos like this one, please make sure to check out our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. Thank you so much again for watching, and as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. See you in the next video. Bye.